Ava Larson stepped into the Miami ballroom, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her presence turning heads as always. At 32, she was the epitome of a life most only dreamed of, a penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay, a tech mobile husband, and a social calendar packed with high-profile events. Tonight's charity gala for a local children's hospital was no exception. Ava had spent the afternoon volunteering, handing out art supplies to kids with a warmth that made her the darling of the organizers. Her smile, practiced yet genuine, drew people in, and she knew it. But beneath the charm, a restlessness stirred. Her marriage to Ethan, heir to a software empire, felt like a gilded cage, its bars tightening with every passing day. The gala buzzed with Miami's elite, philanthropists, influencers, and entrepreneurs mingling under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Ava worked the room, her laughter bright as she thanked donors, her words effortlessly gracious. She was good at this, playing the perfect wife, the perfect hostess. But as she sipped her champagne, her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for something or someone to break the monotony. Ethan stood across the room, deep in conversation with a group of investors, his sharp suit and sharper gaze commanding attention. He hadn't glanced her way in over an hour. She was used to it, but tonight it stung. That's when she saw him. A man leaned against the bar, his posture relaxed yet deliberate, like he belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. He was maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and a grin that felt like a challenge. He caught her eye, held it, and raised his glass in a subtle toast. Ava's pulse quickened. She turned away, pretending to listen to a donor's story, but her thoughts were already elsewhere. Who was he? She didn't recognize him from Miami's usual social circuit, and that alone intrigued her. Great event, a voice said behind her, low and warm. She turned to find him there, closer now, his camera slung over his shoulder. Jake Torres, freelance photographer. I'm covering the gala for the hospital's newsletter. His handshake was firm, his eyes lingering just a second too long. Ava introduced herself, though she sensed he already knew who she was. They chatted about the charity, the kids, the art program she'd championed. His questions were thoughtful, his humor sharp, and every word felt like a spark. For the first time in months, Ava felt seen, not as Ethan's wife, but as herself. The conversation stretched longer than it should have. Jake's stories about his travels, snapping photos in remote villages, chasing sunsets, made her laugh in a way she hadn't in years. She caught herself leaning closer, her guard slipping. Across the room, Ethan's head turned, his eyes locking onto hers for a brief, unreadable moment before he returned to his conversation. A chill ran through her, but Jake's voice pulled her back. You don't strike me as someone who settles for ordinary, he said, his tone teasing but pointed. Ava's smile faltered. Was it that obvious? She excused herself, citing a need to check on the auction, but Jake's card was already in her hand, slipped to her with a grin that promised more than just professional courtesy. Back at home that night, Ava sat on the edge of her bed, the card between her fingers. Ethan was still out, likely at some late meeting. The silence of their penthouse was deafening. She typed Jake's number into her phone, hesitated, then saved it, just in case. The next week, Ava found herself at a trendy Coconut Grove cafe, supposedly to discuss photos for the charity's website. Jake was already there, his laptop open, a black coffee steaming beside him. Didn't think you'd show, he said, smirking. She rolled her eyes but sat down, the thrill of the meeting outweighing her guilt. Their conversation veered from work to personal in minutes, her love for painting, his knack for finding beauty in chaos. He listened in a way Ethan hadn't in years, his attention like a drug she didn't know she craved. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings became a routine. A quick coffee here, a walk along South Beach there. Each encounter was a rush, a secret rebellion against the life that felt more like a performance than a marriage. Jake's texts lit up her phone at odd hours, each one a jolt of adrenaline. Meet me at the pier, one read. She went, ignoring the voice in her head that whispered caution. They stood side by side, watching the waves, his arm brushing hers. You deserve more than this, he said, his voice soft but firm. You're not happy, Ava. It's obvious. She didn't deny it. Instead, she let herself lean into him, just for a moment, the ocean breeze masking the weight of her choices. But later, alone, doubt crept in. Ethan's distance was growing, his comments sharper. Late again, he'd asked the other night, his tone neutral, but his eyes searching. She'd brushed it off, but the prenup loomed in her mind, a document she'd signed without a second thought, binding her to Ethan's fortune unless she stayed faithful. If she left or was caught, she'd lose everything. The penthouse, the cars, the life. The realization made her stomach twist, but Jake's voice echoed louder. Make him leave first. Ava started testing the waters, dropping subtle hints to Ethan. Sighs about feeling unappreciated, mentions of needing space. She thought she was clever, steering the marriage toward a breaking point she could control. But Ethan's responses were measured, almost too calm. He'd nod, change the subject, or disappear into his office. It unnerved her, but she pushed forward, convinced she could outmaneuver him. What she didn't see was the faint smile Ethan hid when she turned away, or the way his fingers tapped his phone, as if counting down to something. One evening, as Ava slipped out to meet Jake at a discreet hotel bar, she caught a glimpse of a man watching her from across the street. His face was shadowed, but his posture felt familiar. She shook it off, blaming paranoia, and stepped into Jake's waiting smile. But deep down, a seed of unease took root. Ethan wasn't the type to let things slide, and Ava was about to learn just how far he'd go to protect what was his. That Ava's double life was a tightrope, and she walked it with a mix of thrill and dread. Her secret meetings with Jake had become the pulse of her days, each one pulling her further from the polished facade of her marriage to Ethan. The Miami sun beat down as she slipped into a quiet bar in Wynwood, where Jake waited, his camera bag slung over a chair. His grin greeted her, but today it carried an edge, like he sensed the stakes were rising. "You're late," he teased, sliding a coffee her way. Ava forced a smile, her mind replaying the shadow of the man she'd seen watching her last night. She hadn't told Jake, didn't want to sound paranoid, but the unease clung to her. Their conversation started light, circling around his latest photo project, but it didn't take long for Jake to steer it deeper. "You're still playing the perfect wife," he said, leaning forward, his voice low. "Why keep pretending? You're not happy, Ava." She fidgeted with her cup, the truth of his words cutting sharper than she liked. She admitted the marriage felt hollow, a routine of forced smiles and silent dinners. But then she hesitated, glancing around the bar before whispering, "It's not just about leaving. There's a prenup. If I cheat or file for divorce, I get nothing. No money, no home, nothing." Jake's eyes narrowed, not with surprise, but with calculation. "Then make him end it," he said, his tone almost too casual. "Push him until he walks away first." The idea wasn't new, but hearing it again sparked something reckless in Ava. She began testing Ethan, weaving subtle barbs into their conversations, comments about feeling ignored, hints at needing more from life. At home, she'd linger on her phone, letting Ethan catch glimpses of her texting, though she was careful to delete Jake's messages. Ethan's reactions were maddeningly calm. "Everything okay?" he'd ask, his voice neutral, his eyes unreadable. Once, she caught him staring at her phone as she set it down, his fingers twitching like he was itching to grab it. It sent a chill through her, but she brushed it off. She was in control, or so she thought. Jake, meanwhile, was relentless. Their meetings grew bolder, lunchtime escapes to a boutique hotel in South Beach, stolen hours where Ava felt alive again. In his arms, she could forget the prenup, the marriage, the creeping sense that Ethan was watching. Jake's words were a drug. "You're too vibrant for this cage, Ava. You deserve freedom." One afternoon, as they lay tangled in hotel sheets, she laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and murmured, "Today's our anniversary. Can you believe I'm here instead of with him?" Jake's eyebrow shot up, his hand tightening on her waist. "And yet you're with me," he said, his tone half teasing, half probing. "Ethan's a bore, isn't he?" Ava sighed, nodding. "You have no idea." Jake's gaze sharpened, like he was peeling back her layers. "If he's so unbearable, why stay? Really, Ava, what's holding you?" She froze, the question hitting like a spotlight. She turned away, staring at the ceiling. "It's not that simple," she said finally, her voice tight. "That prenup, it's a trap. I signed it years ago, thinking it was just paperwork. If he catches me, I lose everything." She shook her head, the weight of her regret settling in. "I was naive. I thought love would be enough. Jake was quiet for a moment, then smirked. So you're stuck unless he screws up first. Sounds like you need to outsmart him. The words lit a fire in her. Ava began to escalate her game, dropping bolder hints to Ethan, leaving her phone unlocked with vague texts visible, forgetting to mention where she'd been. She wanted him to snap, to confront her, to give her an out. But Ethan's calm was unshakable. He'd asked pointed questions. Another charity meeting? His tone laced with something she couldn't quite place. At night, she'd catch him working late in his office, the glow of his laptop casting shadows. Once, she swore she saw a file open with her name on it, but he closed it before she could be sure. Her meetings with Jake took on a new intensity. He pushed her to take risks, to meet more often, to let go of caution. What's the worst that could happen? He'd say, his grin daring her to cross another line. But the more she leaned into him, the more her paranoia grew. A car parked too long outside her gym. A stranger lingering near her favorite coffee shop. She mentioned it to Jake, half expecting him to laugh it off, but he just shrugged. You're stressed, Ava. Ethan's got you on edge. Maybe it's time to make a move. His words sounded supportive, but there was a glint in his eyes that made her stomach twist. One evening, as she left the hotel after another rendezvous, Ava spotted the same shadowed figure across the street, this time closer. Her heart raced as she hurried to her car, checking her mirrors the whole drive home. When she walked into the penthouse, Ethan was there, sitting in the dark, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Late night, he said, not a question. Ava's throat tightened. Just a charity thing, she lied, her voice too bright. He nodded, his eyes locked on hers. And for the first time, she saw something dangerous in his stare. Not anger, but certainty. The next day, Jake texted her to meet at a new spot, a quiet lounge in Coral Gables. Ava hesitated, but went, drawn by the pull of his presence. As they sat in a corner booth, his hand brushing hers, he leaned in. You're close to breaking free, he whispered. Just keep pushing him. Ava nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Ethan's stare, the figure in the shadows. She didn't notice the man at the bar, his phone angled just enough to catch her in its frame. Nor did she see the faint nod he gave to someone outside, someone who knew exactly what Ethan needed to end this game. The Miami skyline glittered through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, but the air between Ava and Ethan was thick with tension. It was their 7th anniversary, and Ava sat across from him at a sleek Coral Gables bistro, her posture rigid as she played the role of devoted wife. She'd spent the day with Jake, her heart still racing from their latest hotel rendezvous. His words, push him until he breaks, echoing in her mind. Tonight, she planned to nudge Ethan further, to provoke a reaction that might give her the upper hand. But as she studied him, his silence unnerved her. Ethan's eyes were fixed on the menu, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. He hadn't smiled once. Ava adjusted her napkin, forcing a light tone. Nice choice, this place. Been a while since we came here, right? Ethan's response was a curt nod, his gaze never leaving the menu. She tried again, her voice brighter. Maybe after dinner, we could take a walk like we used to. No reply, just another nod, colder than the last. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't the Ethan she knew, the one who'd at least pretend to engage. Tonight, he was a wall, and every second of silence felt like a tightening noose. She shifted in her seat, her mind racing. Had he noticed her late nights? The texts she'd been careless with? She'd been so sure she was steering this game, dropping hints to make Ethan doubt her loyalty, to push him toward ending the marriage. But his distance felt calculated, not emotional. The waiter arrived with appetizers, and Ethan didn't even glance at the plate, let alone offer her the first bite, a small gesture he'd always made before. Ava's unease grew, but she pressed on, determined to break through. You seem off tonight, she said, leaning forward, her tone laced with just enough concern to sound genuine. Everything okay? Ethan took a slow sip of wine, his eyes finally meeting hers. The look wasn't anger or hurt. It was something sharper, like a predator sizing up its prey. Funny you should ask, he said, his voice low and deliberate. Before she could respond, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it on the table with a soft thud. Ava's breath caught. Her hands went cold as he slid the envelope toward her, his movements slow, almost theatrical. Go ahead, he said, his tone chillingly calm. Open it. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the flap. Photos spilled out, grainy but unmistakable. Her and Jake, caught in moments that left no room for excuses. Outside the hotel, in a car, his hand on hers at the lounge. The timestamps were precise, some from just days ago. Ava's heart pounded, her mouth dry as she tried to form words. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. There's video too, he said, placing a small USB drive on the photos. In case you want to see yourself in action. The restaurant seemed to shrink, the chatter of other diners fading into a dull roar. Ava's mind scrambled for an escape, but Ethan's gaze pinned her in place. How did you? She started, but he cut her off. You thought you were clever, he said, his voice steady but laced with venom. Playing games, dropping hints, thinking you could outsmart me. But I've known for months, Ava. Every move, every lie. He paused, letting the words sink in. Jake? He works for me. The world tilted. Ava gripped the table, her knuckles white. What? She whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. Jake Torres, freelance photographer. Or rather, Jacob Reese, private investigator. I hired him to test you. And you failed spectacularly. Her vision blurred as the truth crashed over her. Every smile, every touch, every whispered promise from Jake. It was all a lie, orchestrated by the man sitting across from her. She'd been played, not just by Jake, but by Ethan, who'd watched her unravel with cold precision. You set me up, she said, her voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. Ethan didn't flinch. You set yourself up, he countered. You signed the prenup. You made the choices. I just gave you the rope. He pushed his chair back, standing with a calm that made her skin crawl. See you in court, Ava, he said, adjusting his jacket. Then he turned and walked out, leaving her alone with the photos, the USB drive, and the wreckage of her life. Ava sat frozen, the envelope staring back at her like a guilty verdict. Her hands shook as she shoved the photos back inside, her mind reeling. How long had Ethan known? How deep had this gone? She thought of Jake's easy grin, his promises of freedom, the way he'd pushed her to take bigger risks. It was all a script, and she played her part perfectly. Shame and panic clawed at her chest, but beneath it, a spark of anger flared. She'd been betrayed, yes, but she wasn't done yet. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed Jake's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again, same result. Text bounced back undelivered. Her heart sank as she opened his social media profiles, only to find them gone, erased as if he'd never existed. The realization hit like a punch. Jake wasn't just a liar. He was a ghost. Ava's breath hitched as she scrolled through her gallery, searching for proof of him. Nothing. He'd always dodged photos, claiming it was safer. Now she saw why. The waiter approached, asking if she needed anything, but Ava barely heard him. She stuffed the envelope into her purse and left, the photos burning a hole in her mind. Outside, the Miami night was humid, the city's pulse mocking her chaos. She drove aimlessly, her thoughts a storm of betrayal and regret. Ethan had outmaneuvered her, but worse, he'd exposed her to herself. She'd risked everything for a man who didn't exist, for freedom that was never real. And now, with the prenup's terms looming, she stood to lose it all. The courtroom in downtown Miami was a sterile battleground, its air heavy with the weight of finality. Ava sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly to stop their trembling. The divorce proceedings had moved with ruthless speed, Ethan's legal team wielding the prenup like a guillotine. The photos and videos from that fateful anniversary dinner were undeniable, each frame a nail in the coffin of her carefully curated life. Ava's lawyer, a weary public defender, had warned her there was no way out. The prenup was ironclad. If she was found at fault, she'd walk away with nothing. And Ethan had made sure she was. The judge's voice cut through her thoughts, confirming the inevitable. Based on the evidence and the terms of the prenuptial agreement, all assets remain with Mr. Larson. Ava's breath hitched as the gavel fell, sealing her fate. The penthouse, the cars, the bank accounts gone. She was left with 2 suitcases of personal belongings and a one-way ticket to nowhere. Ethan sat across the room, his face impassive, his victory complete. He didn't gloat, didn't need to. His silence was louder than any taunt. Ava left the courthouse in a daze, the Miami heat pressing against her as she dragged her suitcases to a cab. She gave the driver her parents' address in Orlando, a place she'd sworn never to return to. The 3-hour drive was a blur of regret and rage. She replayed every moment with Jake, searching for clues she'd missed. His easy charm, his perfectly timed encouragements, they weren't love, they were bait. And she'd swallowed it whole, lured by the promise of escape from a marriage that had long since lost its spark. Ethan's masterstroke, hiring Jake to trap her, felt like a betrayal deeper than her own. At her parents' modest ranch house, Ava knocked, her pride crumbling with each tap. Her mother opened the door, her face softening with pity rather than judgment. "Come in, sweetheart," she said, taking a suitcase. Ava stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards a stark contrast to the marble of her former life. Her father sat in the living room, offering a quiet nod, but no questions. They knew enough from the tabloid whispers that had already begun to spread. Ava's fall from grace was Miami's latest gossip, and it stung more than she'd expected. That night, alone in her childhood bedroom, Ava tried calling Jake again. Voicemail. She texted, her messages vanishing into the void. Social media was a dead end. His profiles were gone, his existence erased. Desperation clawed at her. She needed answers, proof that Jake wasn't just a figment of Ethan's revenge. She scrolled through her phone, searching for any trace of him, but found only her own naivety staring back. Jake's insistence on no photos and living in the moment now screamed calculation. She'd been a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. The next morning, Ava reached out to Mia, a former friend from her charity days. They hadn't spoken in months. Mia had always been blunt, never fully buying Ava's polished persona. Over coffee at a small Orlando diner, Ava spilled everything. The affair, the photos, Ethan's trap. Mia listened, her expression unreadable, until Ava mentioned Jake's disappearance. "You really don't get it, do you?" Mia said, setting down her cup. "Jake didn't just vanish. He never existed. Not the way you think." Ava's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia leaned forward, her eyes hard. "His name's not Jake Torres. He's a pro, Ava. A private investigator Ethan hired to play you. Every word, every date, it was all scripted. Ethan set the stage, and you walked right into it." Ava's hand shook, coffee sloshing onto the table. "How do you know this?" she demanded. Mia shrugged, her tone matter of fact. "Word gets around in our circles. Ethan's been planning this for months, ever since you started pulling away. He didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to destroy you." The words hit like a physical blow. Ava's mind raced, piecing together the timeline. Ethan's odd calm, his cryptic comments, the shadowed figure she'd noticed but dismissed. It all made sense now. He'd been watching her long before the gala, waiting for her slip. And Jake, with his perfect smile and perfect lies, had been the trap she couldn't resist. She felt sick, not just at Ethan's betrayal, but at her own blindness. She'd thrown away everything for a mirage. Determined to find proof, Ava hired a private investigator of her own, a grizzled ex-cop named Ray. She gave him everything she had on Jake, his phone number, the places they'd met, every detail she could recall. Days later, Ray called her to a meeting at a dive bar. He slid a thin folder across the table, his face grim. "You're not going to like this," he said. Inside was a report confirming Mia's story. Jacob Reese, alias Jake Torres, was a hired operative specializing in corporate and personal sting operations. His employer? Ethan's company. The folder included invoices, emails, even a contract outlining Jake's role to seduce Ava and document her infidelity. Ava stared at the pages, her hands trembling. Every moment she'd cherished, the laughter, the stolen kisses, the promises of a new life, was a lie, meticulously planned to ensure her downfall. She thought she was playing Ethan, but he'd been the chess master all along. The prenup, the photos, Jake's betrayal, it was a perfect setup, and she'd walked into it with eyes wide open. Ray leaned back, lighting a cigarette. "Your ex is a cold bastard," he said. "But he played it clean. Legal. You've got no case." Back at her parents' house, Ava sat on the porch, the folder in her lap. The weight of her choices pressed down on her. Her arrogance, her betrayal, her belief that she could outmaneuver Ethan. She'd lost everything. Her home, her status, her dignity. And yet, as the sun set over the quiet Orlando street, a small part of her felt something new: clarity. She'd been a fool, but she was still standing. The game was over, but her life wasn't. For the first time in years, Ava wondered who she was without the wealth, the lies, or the man who defined her. And in that question, she found the first flicker of a way forward. Ava stood on the cracked porch of her parents' Orlando home, the evening air heavy with the scent of jasmine. 6 months had passed since the divorce, since the courtroom stripped her of the life she'd known. The folder from Ray, the private investigator, still sat on her nightstand, a grim reminder of Ethan's calculated victory and Jake's fabricated affection. She hadn't opened it in weeks, but its weight lingered, a silent accusation of her own naivety. Miami's glitter felt like a distant dream now, replaced by the quiet rhythm of a life she'd once fled. Yet in that quiet, Ava was starting to find herself. She'd taken a job at a local nonprofit, organizing art workshops for kids in underserved neighborhoods. It was a far cry from the charity galas where she'd once played the sparkling socialite, but the work grounded her. The kids' unfiltered joy as they painted reminded her of a passion she'd buried under designer bags and social status. Her first paycheck was modest, barely enough for rent, but it was hers, earned, not given. For the first time, Ava felt a flicker of pride that didn't depend on someone else's name or wealth. Her parents' home, once a symbol of defeat, became a refuge. Her mother cooked dinners that filled the house with warmth, and her father shared stories of his own failures, lessons Ava now clung to. They didn't judge her, though she saw the worry in their eyes when tabloid snippets about her divorce resurfaced online. Miami's gossip mill hadn't forgotten her fall, and neither had her old circle. Texts from former friends were rare, usually laced with pity or veiled disdain. Ava deleted them without replying. She was done performing for people who'd never truly known her. But the past wasn't done with her. One morning, scrolling through her phone over coffee, Ava froze. A photo was circulating on social media. Ethan, smiling at a South Beach restaurant, his arm around Lily, his former assistant. Lily, the woman Ava had dismissed for years, treating her like a footnote in her glamorous life. The comments were brutal. Guess Ava's out, Lily's in, and from assistant to queen, talk about an upgrade. Ava's stomach churned, not just from jealousy, but from the sting of recognition. She'd mocked Lily's quiet efficiency, her plain presence at meetings, never imagining she'd be the one standing by Ethan now. The photos kept coming over the weeks. Ethan and Lily at a tech conference, a yacht party, a charity event Ava once headlined. Ethan wasn't hiding their relationship. He was flaunting it, each public appearance a deliberate twist of a knife. Ava remembered the times she'd belittled Lily, cutting her off mid-sentence or ignoring her at galas. Lily had never flinched, her calm professionalism unshaken. Now, Ava saw the truth. While she'd been chasing thrills with a man who didn't exist, Lily had been there, steady and loyal, earning Ethan's trust in ways Ava never had. The realization forced Ava to confront her own arrogance. She believed wealth and charm made her untouchable, that she could manipulate her way out of any mess. But Ethan had seen through her, and Lily's quiet strength had outlasted her schemes. Ava spent nights replaying her choices, not just the affair, but the years she'd spent chasing status over substance. She'd lost herself long before Ethan's trap, seduced by a life that demanded perfection but left her empty. Determined to rebuild, Ava threw herself into her work. She pitched a new program at the nonprofit, securing a grant to expand the art workshops. The victory was small, but hers, a step toward a life built on her own terms. She started painting again, late at night when the house was quiet, her canvases raw and unpolished but honest. Each stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd buried. She even reconnected with Mia, meeting for coffee despite the sting of their last conversation. Mia was blunt as ever. "You're different," she said, stirring her latte. "Less fake. Keep going." Ava nodded, swallowing the urge to defend her old self. Mia was right. One evening, Ava's phone buzzed with a news alert. Ethan's company had gone public, a multi-billion-dollar milestone. The article featured a photo of him and Lily at the stock exchange, her hand on his arm, both beaming. Ava stared at it, waiting for the familiar pang of resentment, but it didn't come. Instead, she felt a strange relief. Ethan had moved on, building a life with someone who'd earned it. And Ava? She was starting to do the same. Sitting on the porch one night, sketchbook in hand, Ava thought about the moral of her story. Ethan's revenge had been cold, legal, and devastating, using the prenup and Jake's deception to ensure her accountability. But it wasn't just his victory, it was her reckoning. She'd betrayed him, yes, but more than that, she'd betrayed herself, chasing a hollow dream of luxury over integrity. Now, with nothing but her own resilience, she was learning what mattered: authenticity, purpose, the courage to face her flaws. Ava closed her sketchbook and looked at the stars. The woman who'd once defined herself by Miami's skyline was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who'd lost everything but found the strength to start again. Life hadn't punished her with pain. It had shown her what she'd thrown away and given her a chance to rebuild. And as she stepped back into the house, her pencil tucked behind her ear, Ava knew she'd never play anyone's game but her own again.